Hi, everyone. It's Reina Rose here from your favorite show, Soul Nutrition. I want to tell you about our amazing series running all of Valentine's month. This February, every weekend, you will find new couples who have extraordinary relationships and who teach you the secrets to long lasting, passionate, and fulfilling love. So make sure to tune in here on CTM Network. Welcome to the Soul Nutrition Valentine's Month special, where we discuss one very important element of nourishing the soul, love. Today's guests are Morgan and Cheri Snyder of the Wild at Heart and Becoming Good Soil Ministries. Morgan is a grateful husband of over 20 years and a proud father of a wildly creative and witty daughter and joyful and passionate son. He serves as a strategist, entrepreneur, teacher, writer, and speaker, where he has led over a decade of Becoming Good Soil intensives and sold out Wild at Heart men's events across the US, UK, South Africa, and Australia. Cheri is professionally trained in offering trauma-informed soul restoration and care through mindfulness and movement classes. She teaches students regularly at Mary's Home, the Navigators, the Classical Academy, and in private workshops through her organization, the Deeply Rooted Collective. Cheri is a teacher who leads alongside Stacey Eldridge at captivating retreats around the globe and is occasionally a guest teaching pastor at Discovery Church, Colorado. Morgan and Cheri, it is truly an honor to have you on the show today.
Reina, I've never been a Valentine's special.
No.
That makes me nervous. Oh my
Seriously.
goodness. We were engaged on Valentine's
We
Day,
were.
but I'm a little nervous to be a Valentine's special.
Well, we'll have to take that engagement spirit that you had on Valentine's Day and bring that into this Valentine's
great.
special.
Reina, there's also a feeling as you're, reading off those very generous introductions. I'm like, who is she talking about? Oh, thank you. We're grateful. We're humbled. Thank you so much for the privilege of being here. And really, our heart is to just show up as very regular people on the path wanting to receive love and grow in our capacity to respond to it and offer it. So thanks for having us, Reina.
Oh, it's truly my pleasure. And part of the reason that I invited you here on this Valentine's special is because the love that you two display for God, for one another, for God's children is unique, and it really shines God's glory to the world in such a special way, because you don't only get out there and tell people all the things that have worked for you and the tips and tricks to having a great relationship. You really get into the vulnerabilities of the times that you were having trouble, the times that you were just like all the couples out there who are looking for this kind of advice, and how you made it through with God's guidance, and how you've seen different couples throughout the decades help make it through to have a wonderful relationship, the kind of relationship God created us to have, rather than the relationship that, we kind of see two things out there in the world. This fantasy that everything's going to look like Cinderella and Snow White and happily ever after fairy tale that stops right at the wedding, right? We never see past that. Or you really should just be realistic. Your relationship's going to look like sitting on the sofa watching Netflix, and that's all life has to offer, And so we see these two extremes, and one's just totally unrealistic and the other is not very appealing. And I feel like many of this generation has just lost hope that love even exists. And so I really commend you for going out and showing people it exists. It doesn't look like this, but in so many ways, it's so much better, so much deeper, so much juicier. So I want to get into this a little bit. I want to talk about the 3 styles of communicating. I've gotten, let me just touch really quick. There is a program that you sent me that is now free for people to tune into What was that called so that I can promote that? Because it was fabulous. And I would love for more people to be able to tune into that resource.
You know what you're talking about the Wild at Heart Tribe? Is that what
Yes,
you're
the
talking about?
tribe.
Yes. So Wild at Heart, we just moved towards a model of trying to give away almost everything for free in the spirit of, it's a crowdfunded mission. And so we give it away for free. So it's the Wild at Heart Tribe. And you can find it on wildatheart.org. But that's where the teachings that you're referring to, it's an entire library of resources for men, for women, just on inner transformation and spiritual health and well-being. And the specific resource though that dives into these styles of communicating, styles of relating. That's a podcast that we did. And it's a title that's not easy to forget. It's Getting Naked. And that's the Become Good Soil podcast. So be careful when you Google that to find it. But it is the Become Good Soil podcast, Getting Naked. But that's where we offer some vulnerability and courage. Where it's the first time we actually ever taught on that topic.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I think it's a two-part series. And yes, so go to the Becoming Good Soil podcast before you look up that title, because who knows
exactly
what you'll find.
Who knows.
But you really do bear all the parts of yourself in this Becoming Good Soil podcast, and particularly in the Getting Naked episodes, where you talk about, you had these styles and you talk about they can be healthy or unhealthy. And there's the move away, move toward, and move against. And we'll get a little into it a bit more. But one of the things that I thought, now, Cheri, you were so vulnerable by totally allowing Morgan to open up the part that, hey, where do you have trouble when I am being in my unhealthy move toward, right? And you spoke of a story when you were at a point in your marriage, and I can totally identify this. And I feel like especially younger women who haven't identified this in themselves yet struggle with this a lot, where you're asking, are you okay? Are we okay? Is it okay? You're in a bad mood. Can you be in a bad mood? I don't think you can, and you're trying to make him happy so that your relationship is okay. Instead of, you were saying, I could have allowed him just to have a moment where he's not in a good mood because he's a human, right? So can you talk about how you have, talk about first that instance, and then how you've learned these different styles of communicating and how to move from unhealthy to healthy?
Totally. Can I give this up?
Yeah, please.
Reina, so it's the work on the 3 styles of relating is it's based, or our understanding of it first came through the work of Karen Horney. So just as an aside, she is a psychologist who did a lot of research on this. So we want to give a shout out to her. So she did the work on these 3 primary styles of relating. And as you said, they can be in health or unhealth. And we refer to them as move toward, move away, and move against. And as you mentioned, I had a lot of compulsive move toward, and I found it was intolerable for me. I had not yet developed the capacity within myself to tolerate the uncertainty of Morgan's fluctuations of mood, and being able to sort of stay present to that, depersonalize it, and give him space. And so I was compulsive in my movements toward him, as opposed to coming from a place that was rooted in God's love for me, maturing a bit more and able to move toward him, not out of compulsion, but out of a genuine, like, is there anything I can do for you? And my well-being is not at stake, whether you say yes or no. So it was a long, long process for me of being unhinged from that compulsive moving toward. And I just want to say it had to do with really getting into my own story, letting that, what was happening for me, the activation, what I began to observe of this like activation and really the evoking of intense anxiety and agitation in me when he was in a bad mood. Immediately I would assume it was something I did or didn't do. And I had to become curious about that, and became a trailhead into some deeper story work for me and understanding. And then from that excavation of my story, really asking Holy Spirit to train me to be able to learn to know how to sort of self-soothe with God so that there was more latitude for him to be able to have his feelings and experiences without them needing to be modulated so that I was okay.
You know, I love how you're talking about this road that you navigated, and something that you both speak about throughout the materials I have watched and listened to is those young parts of yourself. Maybe some people would call it kind of inner child work, but starting to identify. And I read a really great book about listening and inner healing prayer and healing inner parts of ourselves that talks a lot about what you're talking about too, is kind of going back and identifying when that first the tendency to jump to this conclusion or the tendency to feel this way when this thing happens occurred in your life, and healing those parts of yourself. Could you talk about the young parts of ourselves and how to identify them and then choose to come from a place of response rather than reaction?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a pass on the category and you could give an example.
Sure.
Yeah, Reina, I think that often in Christianity, we hear much about the category of salvation. And salvation is a really big reality of coming to a confident, trusting place of our soul under God's care and in genuine connection. But what we don't hear about as much is its salvation and restoration. Like Paul has this fascinating statement of we are saved and we are being saved. And one of the things we've learned is that the path and process of becoming wholehearted requires salvation and ongoing restoration. And so to understand that there are different ages and parts of us that actually get arrested, they get stuck and they fail to grow. A lot of that is out of trauma. And just a perspective from a masculine perspective, I became a follower of God and his kingdom in college. And it was a radical conversion, I would call it, where it was moving from the self-life to a genuine confession and trust and confidence in God. But what I found, Reina, is that I was a man in a man's world, a young man, but what I felt like was a boy on the inside. And so I was a Christian and I had confidence in God and trust in God, but I still had fear. I still had a sense of being on my own and the incessant feeling that's often in the masculine soul in its unhealed place of I am behind. Whatever it is, I am behind. And so what I realized, though I was a believer, in a sense, I came in confidence with God, I was uninitiated in the inner child. There were young parts of me that had yet to come under God's care and yet to mature and yet to heal. So we carry that worldview that the journey of growing in our faith is ever increasing maturity, wholeheartedness, identifying the young places and inviting them to be saved and healed and matured under God's care. And can you think of an example for you of just,
before we get into the example, I do want to touch on that just a little bit more, because your book, I recognize it so much because my book talks about it too, is, being under the image of God and remembering whose we are and whose image we were created in. You go into it a lot in your book where we think we're, just a sinner saved by grace versus, being God's beloved child made in his image. And I think what, you're kind of talking about with these young parts is sometimes we think, okay, the after college guy, he's, in God's image sort of, but I still have these other parts, but we haven't brought that all the way through the traumas. And recognizing, I say in my book that I believe the first sin was not eating the fruit. I really believe the first sin was that they forgot who they were, because if they would have done like Jesus did later and said, I already am like God. He breathed his very breath like me and made me in his image. Get away from me, Satan, like Jesus later would in the temptation, we would be reading a completely different narrative. And so, I really do think we need to recognize who we are. And I hear you saying that that we need to do that, not just for now, not just for the moments ahead, but even for the moments behind where we have these wounded places. We need to bring this knowing you are also God's beloved child, made in his image, who he's well pleased with, even in that failure or that trauma or whatever it was that is leading to maybe this reactive behavior now. And when we can do that, helps us to come out of a responsive place. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
It's really well said.
Yeah. Exactly.
So Cheri, could you share with us one example of those young places and maybe how you found healing in them?
Yes, I'd love to. So, I think as Morgan said, we had this worldview, and I think we underestimated how much our young places were going to show up in our marriage. And in fact, we can now see through the eyes of faith and rescue that was, it's like baked into the plan. Like all of a sudden we have this intense proximity to each other. And so the young places are activated, exposed,
nowhere to hide, right? That's the brilliance of marriage. Yeah. It's this divine sabotage of you can't fake it. That's the good news.
Yeah.
So what I found was, for me, back in this, we touched on this about my compulsive moving toward, are you okay? Are we okay?
Right.
Is a little girl who was really insecure in the love of a father, and insecure in who she was, and felt safe when she knew that someone was pleased with her, and felt terrified if she thought that she was bringing displeasure. And so this young place in me began to be able, to kind of tether myself to Morgan and ride the wave of his pleasure or displeasure. And Precious Morgan was not wanting to be, he wasn't wanting to be this, sun around which I was all of a sudden orbiting and making my emotional life or my contingent on his ups and downs. He's like, oh my gosh, this is not, I don't recognize you from our dating. I don't recognize you, what in the heck? And so for me, that very scared little girl, very uncertain about if she's loved, if she's safe, if she's secure, just showed up in wild, wild, how should I say, just like really, really present. And what happened for me though, Reina, that I grieve is that I heaped a lot of self-hatred on myself. Like, what's wrong with you? You shouldn't be so I knew that this wasn't I knew this wasn't mature relating to Morgan. And instead of immediately being curious, I started with contempt. So this dug me down into a depression because I offered contempt for this young place in my heart instead of curiosity. Yeah. And it was really through a process where Jesus came and he said, I'd like to, you offer me your contempt and let me begin to teach you curiosity, to begin to become really curious about what's happening for you. So that exchange of curiosity for contempt has just been signature of the Lord's work in my life.
I love that. I think I was reading, I want to say in Luke a few weeks back about offering our bad things. I think we think about offering our praise, offering, all these good things to the Lord, our service, but offering our contempt and receiving from him, what we need. I feel like that's something that's sometimes overlooked in the church, is to offer all that we don't want to be any longer, offer the hurt, offer the contempt, the bitterness, and allow God to give you the forgiveness, allow him to, exchange beauty for ashes for those things. So I think that's overlooked sometimes, that we can also offer as a sacred offering these things that we no longer want to be part of our hearts. And
Reina, we've learned it's just a practice. Like to grow and mature takes practice. And an example of that, for years, Cheri was so patient with me and trying this exercise where she'd say, Morgan, I'm inviting you to be with me and listen to me, not as my husband, but as my friend. I just need you to be my friend right now. And I'm thinking, what the heck does that mean? Like, I'm your husband and let's get to it. Let's get the problem. Let's figure it out and let's fix it, which doesn't work. Okay.
No.
After 20 years, I've learned. But the invitation was to be known, as you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm inviting you to know me. And we've learned this mutual practice and process of coming to the center of each other's experience, not to fix and not even to fully perhaps understand in the moment, but simply to accept them, to reflect back to them of this is what I hear you saying. And so we would do an exercise where she would say, for example, just as my friend, I want to share, like, my husband is leaving for another trip and he's going on an adventure with his friends. And I'm grateful for his time to be with his buddies. And I know he'll come back encouraged and strengthened and be a better husband. But I have these little kids at home and there's so much going on and we don't have the budget, we don't have the time. Now, if I'm husband, I get defensive. What do you mean? Like, when's the last time? But instead, as a friend, I get to look at her and say, no, he didn't. He's leaving again? He just left. Like, what is he doing? And it's playful, right? It's a chance to, not defensive. It's a chance to come to each other's center, empathize, get to know them, and then work together through the restoration of all the young parts. So we don't have contempt, right? But we welcome them into healing.
Oh, Reina, I love that. Yes.
So, to this practice of, okay, I want you to listen to as my friend, not as my husband, or vice versa. He's like, I'd like you to listen as my friend, not as my wife. It really was a rescue for us. And the image I'd like to share, because it has never left me since, is that we really did feel like for a while we were in this bramble where every move we made, it was like thorn, like we couldn't move without hurting each other. Like it was just
defensive and reaction.
And so we felt like the Holy Spirit gave us a picture of this little tree house above the brambles. And we would go up there and like sit in our tree house and just be able to connect, and then be like, okay, let's go down back into the weeds, as it were, the brambles, and take a few more steps. But this movement to kind of go up and out and sit with some, just to find a way where it felt like there was no way for us to connect, became really essential for us.
I love that picture of the treehouse and the rest in God. And, it's interesting, just in my own life, I think I've been on both sides of this move toward. When you two were explaining it in the podcast, I really felt like I'm generally a move against, but maybe later now, I used to be more of a move toward. But I've been on both sides of it, where I've been the one kind of like needy, like, I need you to tell me that this is okay and we're okay and I'm okay and I'm enough. And then I've been on the other side of it where, a man is like, are we good? Are we good? Are we going to get married? Are we going to, and I'm like, whoa, hold your horses, buddy. Like, let's just, and so I've been on both sides of that. And I like what you're saying though, about being known and being graceful with each other's young places, because it doesn't make, for me, when it was on a man's side, it was like super annoying. Like, why are you needing me to affirm you? But then when I was, when I was the person, I was like, I need you. So if there's grace in those situations, though, where there's a seeking to, okay, what are you really feeling here? This need to make sure everything's okay. What's the deeper, and understand that someone's not this moment alone, that the fear isn't directly because of you or to annoy you, or, but I like the idea of getting to know each other's brambles, getting in there together, and then go take a rest in the treehouse. Tell me about, how did you implement that times of rest, like going to the treehouse versus kind of working through the weeds together?
You want to talk about like a take 10 kind of concept? So just like super practical example, we through some mentors, again, everything we've gleaned has been turning towards older, wiser men and women that are in front of us. And one was this theory called Take 10, where we would take 5 minutes and Cheri would have 5 minutes and then I'd have 5 minutes. And it's a chance to share, here's where I'm at. It's kind of responsive to be known, to know me. This is what I want to share. And then when that person's done, you simply say, thanks for sharing. This is what I hear you saying. And then repeat back, this is what I heard you say. Is that correct? Is that what you said? And if that's not correct, then we just worked until, yes, you've heard me. And then there's no defensiveness, there's no fixing it. The work is simply the dignity and practice of listening. And what we found is that's 10 minutes. So little kids and busy lives, like what we can find is 10 minutes. And somehow there's this permission, things get diffused because you will be heard, you will get your turn, and you know it'll be treated with care and time, that no one's going to jump on you for it. And so it's just an example where life is madness. Everyone's moving, more and more, faster and faster. That's the culture in which we live. And so we have to get practical. Peterson says, if it's not practical, it's not biblical. That's a bold statement. But we have to move from big heady ideas and theology to practical application. So I think that's an example in our everyday life where we really become students of each other's heart, but even, Reina, as you alluded to, students of their story. So much of where we're going is hidden in where we've come. And so how well do you know the stories, the soul's journey of those people entrusted to your care? And there are a lot of treasures hidden in those stories, and we've chosen the slow and steady work of excavating those.
So I want to get into excavation because your book talks a lot about the consent and allowing God to excavate your soul. But I just want to clarify for those watching, because I've heard these sometimes called dyads, but I want to clarify that these are one-sided conversations until you get to the I've heard you, and this is, or thanks for sharing, and this is what I heard you say. It's not a dialogue for 5 minutes on my side and a dialogue for 5 minutes on the other. It's exactly. I'm sharing my soul with you, one-sided. Thank you for sharing, and here's what I heard.
Yes, a practice in listening. And so often when we are with a person, we're actually not listening because our energy is put towards what we'll say, our reaction, our response. And so in this, it's 5 minutes of I'm listening and then reflecting. And then the next 5 minutes is Cheri is listening and reflecting. And so, yes, it's a really healthy practice.
I appreciate clarifying, Reina, because it's different from a dialogue, and it is a different texture of energy from a dialogue. And so thank you. Well done catching.
And I think too, my younger self would have been so excited to share my 5 minutes, let me tell you about what and be known. But this invitation to know someone else, the gift of being able to receive someone's story, someone's young places, someone's hurts, and not judge, not comment, but simply reflect back. This is what I heard you say. Is that right? And to receive that story rather than dialogue on it even, but just to simply thank you for giving me that gift of your soul that you just shared.
Yeah, it helps you tune in to this fundamental question of what is God up to? We want to cultivate a culture of curiosity in our prayer life, curiosity in our marriage, like a God listening heart. I love Peterson's translation of wise and discerning heart. It's a God listening heart. And just to offer full disclosure, you and I connected last week on this topic of where we'll go with this interview. And it was intended to be more of a kind of a functional call, right? What are the topics? But in the time, just in practicing listening, I felt like the Holy Spirit wanted me to just listen in for your story. And we had a beautiful time of connection and prayer over understanding like what God's up to in your life, in my life right now. And so it's an example of, as we practice that, we cultivate that listening, we hear the texture of someone's story and where God is at work in the present moment. And it's really exciting because that's the with God life. It's more than just a set of beliefs, but it's actually a conversational intimacy with God. And it's really fun.
So Reina, I wonder if this is a slight nuance because of our genders. For me, what it is more is this profound experience, like you said, the privilege of proximity, simply the privilege of having him share his story with me. With it need to be nothing more than the practice of honoring that is a gift. a gift
Yes.
received, a gift given.
A gift entrusted with, right? We
So
don't trust everyone with our stories.
It doesn't have to be strategic in any other way. It's and what I notice about that is it causes a hush as opposed to an activation. There's a hush that happens in the wake of that kind of sharing and being heard. That it's its own period. You know, it's its own. It has a punctuation mark of its own, and that even I can feel it in my body is different from now we're gonna like see what God's up to. You know, there's just a hush. If you, I don't know if that makes sense.
And it makes sense, and it really makes sense because you teach that body, mind, spirit to recognize it within your body as well. And I've read so much between like Besser Van der Kolk's the body keeps the score to like your body really registers memories, and I love this trust. There's so many places I want to go right now just between a couple of things you said. So a couple, if we can get to them, I do want to touch Morgan on some of the things we talked about, and I want to tell you that God really confirmed. I think it was the same night we were in Lectio Divina, prayerful reading of Scripture, and that Scripture said a very similar thing to what you said to me. And wow. I'd love to talk. Yeah, it was like I'll find it for you afterward. And it was actually about. So we talked about, for the audience, we talked about something in my life that I've kind of been putting out as an energy about me, not intentionally, but being kind of an intimidating person. It's something that since high school, people have told me, I wanted to ask you out, but you were too intimidating. And I said, I had to bring my best friend to all the dances. Like I was looking for someone to ask me, but I was putting out kind of this intimidation energy, and to repent of that energy, because that's the enemy. So I want to talk a little bit about the enemy's plan for our lives. God has a plan for our lives, and the enemy has a plan to destroy that plan. And so the enemy's plan is to make me look intimidating, unapproachable, when that's not the case, but to make it look so about me. And so we were reading actually the story of the woman who was bent over for 18 years and how the Lord straightened her up instantly, and she was able to live differently from there forward. And I'd have to go into my notes to find exactly how God was like just clearly speaking to me, how he changed that to having a more welcoming spirit and projecting that around me instantly. But the way you said it, it really took me into what your book speaks a lot about. God has a plan for us, but the enemy has a plan too. And the enemy's plan to sabotage, that's something. So we pray into God's plan for us. What's your plan for our marriage? What's your plan for me as an individual? What's your plan for my purpose? And then we say, and let me listen into what's the enemy's plan to sabotage our marriage? What's the enemy's plan to sabotage my purpose? Because if I need to know the other side's tactics to, come into my camp and destroy. So would you two like to talk to a little bit, both in individual and in marriage, how we need to tune into that spiritual warfare and recognize it's there? I think it was C.S. Lewis who talked about, the only thing worse than getting overly focused on demons in the, that realm is pretending like it doesn't exist.
Yes. Yeah, I love that Lewis spoke to that, because spiritual warfare can feel wacky and kind of tangent, right? Because people take it in wacky directions, but
they do.
The truth is, like Jesus says, you'll know by its fruit. Mm-hmm. And so what is the fruit? What's the fruit of a thought, of a worldview, of a way of relating over time? I think it's very helpful and accessible. And I think, Reina, one of the most important things we can know about any human being and every human being is that they bear the image of God. That's the truest thing. They were formed, they were handcrafted in the Imago Dei, his breath being breathed into them to come to life, that we are eternal beings, right? We will live forever in the Imago Dei. And so one of the most important things is anytime we're relating with another person, to say that's in there. Whatever you're seeing or feeling, the core thing is not the brokenness, not the sin, it's the Imago Dei. And so that scripture in John 10:10, where it says, I have come that they might have life, and life in its full measure. I believe that God intends life for all people and all creation. And therefore, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so I believe part of spiritual maturity, part of growing as an apprentice in God's kingdom, is to become educated, to become a student of how are the particular ways that me as an image bearer, me as a man, Cheri as a woman, in my unique gifting and in Imago Dei temperament, how does the enemy want to steal, kill, and destroy? And I'll give a very just risky example. We talked a little bit about this, Reina, and Cheri and I have talked about this for 25 years. I am intense. I am a very intense person. If you read my book and you hear my stories, or if you watch this podcast, you will know. And my intensity is a mixed bag. And as a young man, it got me in a lot of trouble. And so I tried to repent from that intensity. But here was the challenge, is that intensity, I couldn't repent from it because it's actually the image of God in me.
Yes.
The issue was, what is it in the service of? So when the intensity is in the service of the false self, of my brokenness, then I use my intensity to answer my soul's question, to find my validation. Do I have what it takes? When that intensity is in the service of love, I offer strength, and it has a governor. And I know by God's leading when and how to employ it and to what measure. So in our marriage, I think, and I'd love to hear your reflection, my intensity, there's nothing I dreamed of more than being a father and being a husband. It's all I ever wanted. And I wanted to lead and love a woman. And so this intensity to come through and be a man and be a hero in our marriage, in about year 13, we were in a counseling office, and I thought we were doing pretty well. Like, we've been through so much healing and restoration. And I was so excited when they asked the question, how are you guys doing? And then I looked over and you were crying again. And I was like bristly, right? You talked about, like, I'm ready to attack. Like, what do you mean? We've done so much work. And Cheri very courageously articulated, I feel like a beautiful bird in a cage, and you hold the key. And it was at that moment, my defenses came down, and I just simply felt so sad. How could that be the effect that I have on this woman that I love so much, that all I wanted was to offer my strength and love? And yet one of the impacts, one of the fruits of my intensity is she is rendered without wings, that her voice is smothered, that she can't fly. And so it was my chance to really get honest with how I'm stewarding this intensity. And though parts of it had been healed and restored in the service of love, there were parts of my intensity that actually are causing harm to the woman that I most deeply care about. And so it's an example of really looking at that Imago Dei and understanding how the enemy wanted to use that intensity for evil and to destroy our relationship, rather than my intensity to fight for Cheri's voice and the dignity of her vocation and our shared union and unity in the mission. So that's one example. And I'm curious what
Cheri, actually, I would love to ask a question of Cheri here in this moment. So Cheri, being married to this very intense man for 13 years, knowing that he's doing all he can and he's feeling like things are really good right now, and you're in this counseling session having to break his heart to tell him the truth of what this intensity has meant for you, what was running through your heart and your mind in that moment when because obviously you knew he was doing his best and he was really trying and felt like things were good, and you're like, I know you, but tell me, what was your soul turning up at that moment?
I could just weep right now.
Yeah.
That was God acted with us, because it was a pivotal moment, but it was hard. Yeah. So thanks for asking, Reina. That was tough.
Right. I can imagine, because I believe that you didn't, it wasn't like a dysfunctional relationship where someone's actively like poking at you and trying to hurt you. It was in his love, he was smothering you, right? In his intensity of trying to make things great, he was caging you. And then you wanting to be the love and the goodness toward him, you have to say, I know you mean well, and it's also doing this to me. Mm-hmm. So how does a couple navigate that? I mean, because that's a hard thing to say when you know the other person's really trying to love you.
Totally.
I think even one piece in that story is we chose to take our pain to mentors. Right? We were with marriage counselors. We took the risk. Yes. Like no man wants to go to a counselor. Ever. Ever. And no man wants to pay $100 to get kicked between the legs. No man wants that, right? Who wants that? So if there's any men listening, they understand. Okay, I don't know what women are.
$140.
$140 an hour right now,
right? $140 to get kicked between the legs.
And it is 10 cents on the dollar for restoration. It is the best investment, one of the best investments we've ever found. So I think what I would say is we were in the hands of caregivers that said, you're safe, you're loved. And that we knew one of our prayers, and Cheri, you introduced this, of we want the full portion of what God has for a man and a woman under heaven. And we don't know what that is, but whatever it is, we want it. And what we've learned in our model of marriage is we want to fight for each other so that the full intention of what God has for Cheri and for me can come to the earth. But also this third piece that we call our union. It's this third entity. It's us being together in this partnership to create a reality that we cannot have without each other. And that doesn't diminish you or me, but that actually strengthens and heals and brings dignity. I mean, that's one of the mysteries of our faith. And so I think in that, Reina, we've had to be really careful in treating each other's hearts with increasing dignity, to say this is unfinished. We are under renovation. You know, I love when Lewis says that heaven is the consummation of our earthly apprenticeship. You know, it's the consummation of our discipleship, that we are under renovation. And we're not yet, but we're not who we were. And so we just celebrated 20 years of our marriage.
Wow,
and so
congratulations.
It was amazing. And we had these moments where we didn't know if we'd make it. And we had moments where we have hurt each other very deeply. And even in the last 6 months, but here we were at 20 years and just in awe of what God has done and how he's healed and how he's restored. And I think if I could say anything to our friends that are listening or watching, like what we found is the major theme in God's kingdom is breakthrough. The major theme is restoration and renovation and transformation. The major theme is there is more than we could ask for or imagine that is available. And that's not to minimize the loss and heartbreak and struggle, but the major theme is restoration and breakthrough.
You know, I have been focusing a lot on Psalm 23 of late, especially, you know, talked about the last 6 months. And at the time of this recording, we are hopefully on the back end of a pandemic. And many of us have been squished inside of homes that we normally take our adventures from, go do our activities from, and we come back to we leave our bird cage and we come back to it together. But we've been both stuck in these bird cages, right? And a lot of marriages are suffering. You know, I think, you know, sometimes in the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, oh, you're home. Yay, we get some more time together. And then as people settled into the actual, okay, now I'm working on Zoom. I've figured out how to do my work schedule. I'm actually kind of working more because we're figuring this all out. And now I also don't have a separation of church and state. You know, like there's no separation of home and work. And so it's all bleeding into each other. And we just don't, we don't know how to function in this. And we have to figure it out together. And we're going to hurt each other because it's all new landmines we haven't excavated yet and allowed God to come in and give him consent to excavate this new thing. So talk about, even after 20 years, even after leading dozens and dozens of couples, maybe hundreds between all the ministries, maybe thousands, to wonderful restored relationships, you find yourself, in a pandemic, still finding new landmines to hurt each other with. To talk about that, because I think maybe some people out there, in this pandemic phase are finding, okay, well, my marriage just doesn't work because I've seen in these last 6 months the true person and it's not good, rather than that grace of, there's some unhealed parts that being stuck together has shown us.
Totally. Reina, on that, Brene Brown does some amazing work on that idea of an FFT, and I'll translate it: frightening first time, but just this grace of anytime we have you said it so well, but just to normalize the landmines, because we've never done this before. We've never done it. It's so helpful in terms of introducing that grace. And so just in solidarity with any couples or any men and women listening, like, we're right there with you. We're all doing, we have been doing this for the first time, and we want to receive grace. And so thank you so much for inviting us as a community with your listeners to just remember to be gracious with each other in that.
In one way, we've learned to be gracious the hard way is we do have a growth mindset. Like one of the values in our home is to cultivate lifetime learners and lovers. And like, we mean that with our whole heart. We want our children to become lifetime learners and lovers. And one of the challenges with a growth mindset and being students is it's always looking towards the not yet. It's always looking towards the, where do we need to grow, right? Where do we need to grow in our marriage? Grow in our yard, right? It's
hope in a future,
right?
just to be so focused on what needs to grow.
Right.
You're like,
right.
Oh
yes.
That's important, and that's true. And also, like, right in the tapestry of the gospel is celebration. Right? It's just amazing. The first invitation to Adam, he's told that Adam and Eve are meant to rule and reign. But the first invitation is to rest. The first invitation is to stop and settle in. His tanks are full. He's just been created. And the first act is pause and look at the marvelousness of the world in which you inhabit and the invitation bestowed upon you. And so Cheri and I, we just really practice. We have to celebrate. We have to pause. We have to have a Sabbath to say, what has God done? And we did this little exercise, for example, in the new year. So we had our kiddos, 13 and 16, and a house filled with hormones. This is a new season for us. And it's COVID year. And we said we want to reflect on the new year, and we want to do it by looking back. Rather than just asking God for advanced words, which we do, and think towards the future, we put out our pictures from the year, and they're mostly digital. We pulled them out and we asked the question, what is God like based on who he was in our life in this past year? And so look at the pictures, remember the stories. And what is God like? And how do we trust then confidently that's who God will be as we move into this new year? And so, like, a simple activity, Joshua, our son, he looked through his pictures of football was canceled, lacrosse was canceled, that youth group retreat was canceled, everything was canceled. And yet there were all of these other adventures and life hacks and kingdom opportunities that came up as well. And in all of it, he said, what I learned, God is the one thing that's reliable. All these other things that I put my hope in as a 16-year-old turned out to not be reliable, but God is and was reliable. And so I think it's just an example of, where are you celebrating? How are you celebrating? One of our mentors told us, and this is just real tactical, but it's the spirit of it, is in your conversation, make it 75% celebration and positive, and 25% what we need to do with the kids and the budget and the house and my issues. 75%, where do we celebrate? And that's really helped us.
Yeah, because we would do sometimes fall into the opposite. 75% focusing on my issues, his issues,
It's always issues, right?
Fix it. Or even worse, just complain about it and never have any intention to fix it. Like that. A lot of
right?
Fall into that.
Wow. We have to shift our ratios so much.
And how did you do that? Because I would love, like, honestly, I always say I don't talk on the phone to many people, because a lot of people, you talk on the phone too much, and then it just starts becoming all about problems and, because there's really nothing more to talk about. How did you start to shift that?
Totally.
Process. Like, how can someone begin to make 75% complaining turn into 75% celebration?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts and on this. I think it's important for both of us. I think for me, one of the big things that Cheri's modeled in our home that was huge is a culture of forgiveness, of really having a culture where we are quick to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Will you forgive me? And I love you. Like a simple exercise of begin with, I'm sorry, like I was wrong. I take ownership rather than here's where I was right and here's what needs to be fixed. It's I'm sorry. Keep my side of the street clean.
Yeah.
Here, I'm going to own what is mine that's shaping this situation, this problem. And I think it's really created a gracious culture of really owning my stuff and room for other people's hearts and opinions and perspectives and voices to be heard. So that's one piece for me.
That's interesting. I wasn't expecting you to say that. I would say, Reina, for me, that these questions, like, for example, if you're on a phone call, ask, what is something you're celebrating? Or what is something that's going really well for you right now? What do you observe that's going really well? So just, trying to keep that question between us. What are you celebrating? What went really well today? What are you excited about? Also, what are you exploring? Like, what's catching your interest and you're finding yourself kind of fascinated by and wanting to pursue that and learn more about it. So like for us, a step was generating questions that could spark that shift toward positivity. So that's been important for us. And, you may understand he's intense, but so am I. So if you can imagine like our mutual intensity going in a not an optimist, like not a celebratory way, it just gets us way off. So but for us, turning that intensity, both of us, and beginning to focus, what's going well, what are we celebrating, what's something that we're excited about. You can even feel the difference, like the vibration of the question has a different feel to it.
Yes. I have a friend that will just say, what's good. And instead of saying, what's up, how are you doing? They'll just say, hey, what's good? Because sometimes the what's up or how are you doing leads to, oh, my car broke down. And let me tell you about, which, we talk about those things, but like you said, just shifting the quantity that we speak about those things, because it's not that we don't want to dive into each other's hearts. We do. But there's, like you said, the Bible is such a celebratory. We're doing a lot more feasting than fasting, right? We're doing a lot more celebrating than mourning. And that's what God intends us to have, this life abundantly, and to recognize it. And when we recognize it and ask the right questions, then we can be in that 75% celebration. I love that so much.
Reina, can I say something on that though? Is we also do have a question of what are you grieving? And so I think for us, what are you celebrating? What are you grieving? As a practice of being known. And but again, we're 75%. We're curious, we're wanting to spend celebrating, but acknowledge that grief. And then I feel like the Holy Spirit gave me a picture that has given me a lot more courage in those seasons where, there's Catherine May in her book Wintering. She's a poet, but she just talks about sometimes in those seasons where things aren't going well, you suddenly feel like you are in a winter season when everyone else is in a summer season, and in those seasons where our marriage seemed like the ice age had moved in, and it's easy to look and compare at other people who seem like they're in a summer season where they're, there's a, it's easy, I think, for me, it was easy to go to despair of this ice age is going to be forever. And what I felt like the Spirit said is, I want you in these things where you're grieving where you've harmed him, where my style of compulsive move toward has harmed him, or his move against has harmed me. You know, when we were needing to do some grief, the
Mm-hmm.
Holy Spirit said, like, picture our marriage as this plot of ground, and to grieve with gusto, to trust that every tear was watering, replenishing the space, and that harvest would come, you know, and she who sows in tears is going to reap with joy. So if for any of the listeners where they're like, my marriage is an ice age, I don't even know if it's ever going to melt out. And that if there are things to grieve, may you be blessed to grieve with gusto, to know that those tears are generative in that soil, and that the day will come when you will reap a harvest from the hard work you're doing. And I think that's how really what we feel like right now. We're, you know, if someone looked at me and like, gosh, you guys, you know, like our love life is really rich right now, and our, you know, we're just in a, but if you just took a snapshot of now and didn't realize we've had 2 at least major ice ages in 20 years, and some lots of frost in between. If you took it out of context, it would look maybe just like shiny, happy people. But if you dig deep and are curious about the nature of our story, there's been, you know, a lot of things dying and being reborn. So for however a listener is finding him or herself today, whether it's in a season of summer or in a season of intense, you know, just where it feels like there's no life anywhere, may there be some honest truth telling about what it's really like, and some hope that it won't always be winter, that summer will come again.
You know, being from Southern California, I think we forget this because we live in perpetual summer all the time, right? I'm looking outside in the middle of February at the palm trees in the swimming pool, right? And we think that life is supposed to be this palm trees in a swimming pool, you know, all the time. And we forget the rhythms of life that God put all throughout nature to teach us the scriptures all around us, right? And again, I've been coming back to that Psalm 23, how God makes us lie down in green pastures and beside quiet waters to restore our soul. And I think in a culture of hustle, climb the mountain at all costs, we forget that we resist him making us lie down in those green pastures because we say, no, God, I gotta take the hill right now. And he goes, no, you don't understand. I need to restore your soul so that you can soar up the hill rather than struggle. And I think, especially right now in this COVID time, so many people, whether it's in relationships or career, or just this collective consciousness of people suffering, or a lot of pause that's happened during this time. Like you were mentioning, your son Joshua saying, like, you know, this got canceled and that got canceled. We can feel cheated, or that we're not able to take the mountain right now. Or we can say, God is restoring my soul. Like you said, I can be weeping tears into the ground, that the soil can really become rich, and be in that moment. I think another thing that in the church and in a culture of personal development and making, like you said, how do we improve? You know, and I've been the worst offender of this, so I can say it out of experience. You know, we say, you know, just keep saying that affirmation and you'll be okay. But there's times when we really need to feel it. And I've had really well-intending friends, anywhere from, you know, when I've been in tough spots in life, maybe like a dark night of the soul, as Mother Teresa would have called it. And I remember one of my good friends in the church at Monaco I used to sing at, she said, you know, it's going to get better and everything's going to be okay. And I looked at her and said, I know that. I do. But God is excavating this in my soul right now. And it's painful. I just need you to be here with me in my pain, because I know it will get sunny again. I know that healing and feeling good is around the corner, but I have to allow, and I love again that you always talk about that, allowing God to excavate your soul. Like, I have to allow this to happen. And sometimes surgery doesn't feel good, especially if you don't have an anesthetic, right? Sometimes it's like, it's a painful excavation, and we have to feel it. And so I want to encourage anyone out there who's maybe feeling that they're not good enough or not worthy because they're feeling pain. But there's times when that's acceptable, and times when maybe it's time to go get a counselor or coach or a therapist to help us through that pain, because not all pain, I would say, is even safe to go through ourselves. You know, God didn't call us to be alone. It's the first thing, God said, this is good and this is good. Not good for man to be alone. So I want to encourage anyone out there who needs, seek out a counselor or a therapist or a coach, because these are really helpful. Even if you have to pay $140 to get kicked between the legs.
The joy comes in the morning. Sorrow lasts for a night. Joy comes in the morning.
I wanted to touch, your son Joshua sounds very wise. He was, talking about how God is the only reliable thing in all of this. And one thing from your book, Becoming a King, right? Yes, Becoming a King, that you talk about allowing God to build my character rather than spending my energy on building my own kingdom. And the Father began to supernaturally place me in roles of shaping his kingdom. So you were talking about in your book about how, you had plans of being the CEO and this and rich, like you had your plans that were good, but you had to allow God to shape that, rather than just your own striving. And this is something I struggle with as well. How have you seen that in your marriage, where maybe you're, seeing couples who are in that summer moment and you're striving to get out of the winter as fast as you can, or, but allowing God to come into that season and gently melt away the frost rather than trying to take a blow dryer to it, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes. Go ahead.
There's one kind of prayer mantra that a mentor gave me years ago that I just latched onto that's helped, where it's live in the day and measure in the decade. Live in the day and measure in the decade. Because, Reina, we find that by default, we do the opposite. We live in the decade and we measure in the day, right? It's like the stock market, like every 10 years, if you just look decade by decade, there's a pretty obvious trend. Yeah. And yet if you look day by day, it's bipolar and schizophrenic and it will drive you mad, right? Because that's not the measurement. I was sitting with a mentor and I was venting, and he's talking about how things have gone sideways, and he paused. And I was a young man, young married, and he looked at me with a smile and he said, some decades are better than others. I said, what the hell am I supposed to do with that? I'm just trying to get to dinner, and the longest hope I have is vacation, right? What do you mean? But I sensed it was the kindness of a father saying, the best things in life take time. Nature teaches us that. It's meant to be our first sacred text, that the best things in life take time. And so we chose to settle in to our marriage after we were rushing for everything. And instead we said, we choose to live in the day and measure in the decade.
I love that. Well, I could just keep talking to you two for hours, and I wish that we could keep doing that on air. What, two things, if there was one encouraging thing for couples out there to just really hang on to, what would you say that was? Maybe one from each of you, and then let us know where people can find you.
One thing. I think of Curly and the City Slickers. If you haven't seen that in a while, wonderfully encouraging. What's the one thing? What I found, and I really unpack this in Becoming a King, and really in all of my work with Become Good Soil, is when a person comes home to sonship and receives God as a parent, as a father, as a mother, and we come home as a daughter and a son, and that shapes our seeing, our interpreting. I believe in some way that's the lens by which all things become true and good and beautiful. And there's a lot more to say about that in Becoming a King, but I think it's just one practice that I've developed over a life, or over maybe about 13 years, that has transformed my life, is when I wake up in the morning, the very first thing I do, which is available to me on every day, is to declare in my soul, God, you're a father, and I am your son, and I invite you to father me today. before I get out of the bed, before I brush my teeth, before I shift to a to-do list or all the places that I need to come through or I feel behind, I begin with that acknowledgement. You are my father. I am your son. I invite you to father me today. And Reina, what I found in that as a husband, as a father, as a man, to allow scarcity to be replaced with abundance, to allow independence to be replaced with this intimacy of interdependence and connection with a father who's abundant and strong and caring and playful and ordering. A really good story for my life. Yes. Becoming a son changes everything. That's what I'd say. How about you?
I can relate to that, Morgan. And for me, that shift from just not having a revelation of the love of a father to beginning to receive God's love in my body has completely changed how I experience every moment of every day. So I echo that, Morgan. Reina, what I would like to invite, those who are listening and watching is, can ask yourself to choose one thing for the next 2 weeks to become curious about and how you observe yourself responding or reacting in your marriage. Just choose one and begin to ask Father about it, and become curious. So there's this little acronym that Morgan and I use together. So the first one is pause and listen, PAL. And then it's ground and soothe. So if I'm agitated, I need to find some way to kind of find my grounding, find some way to be soothed that doesn't bring harm to Morgan or to myself, and then be curious about the root. And so to just choose one thing in kindness to become curious about with an expectation that there's great treasure to be found in that just simple posture of curiosity.
I love that. And so where can we find your ministry online, as well as the book, Becoming a King, which I am about 2/3 of the way through and I cannot recommend more. So those of you out there listening, make sure that you tune into that podcast, the Becoming Good Soil. I've just found so much treasure in that. Buy the book, whether that's I got it on Audible, so you can listen to it, or you can get the hard copy as well, which I have at home. I really encourage you, check out these materials, because you are going to grow. And I'm sure you've heard a lot of treasure just now, and we could go on for hours. So if you'd like to go on for hours with us, make sure to check out the book, check out the website, check out the podcast. And Morgan, could you remind us where the website is?
Sure. Yeah, it's been such a privilege and honor to walk with you and with men and women around the globe that want more. I think we find ourselves as students and apprentices, Reina, and we want the full portion. And I think if anything in this time together has really moved people and they're curious, that's what we've given our life's work to. So all of that can be found at becomingaking.com. We've got blogs and podcasts and video teaching, but it's all at becomingaking.com.
And Reina, for my my business, Deeply Rooted Collective, you can find me on Instagram. It's deeplyrooted_collective. Just a group of humans engaging these questions together.
Yes, and really tuning into that soul body connection that God has given us. I think that's one thing we misunderstand in the church is the flesh, and that our body that God himself chose to create and then incarnate in is a very good thing, and it is separate from flesh, as we read in the Bible. So yes, definitely tune into the deep-rooted_collective. Is that correct?
Thanks. Deeply_collective. And then deeplyrootedcollective.com.
Perfect. Definitely tune into that, because we all, I think, especially as a church, need to remember that our bodies, these created temples to harness the soul that God has breathed into us, are really good things. And we can tune into what God's showing us in our body. So definitely check out Deeply Rooted Collective, check out Becoming Good Soil, check out Becoming a King. All of it. There's just so much, and you can be with us for hours and hours. We encourage you to join us. So we thank you so much for tuning in. And until I see you again, may the Lord bless and keep you, cause his face to shine upon you, and nourish your soul.
Hello, CTM News viewers. We love you and appreciate you. I'm, of course, Reina Rose, host of Soul Nutrition on CTM News. I'm excited to tell you about my new book, Sin Tastes Good, Nourishing Your Soul in an Empty Calorie World, where we explore connection to God, self, and other people around us. Have you ever wanted to deepen your connection with God, deepen your connection with those around you, and deepen your connection with yourself? Well, this is the book for you. We dig into questions about what we want our lives to look like and answers of how to get there. It comes out Thanksgiving 2020, and I can't wait to have you all read Sin Tastes Good along with me. For special updates, please follow my Instagram, which is The Soul Nutritionist, with little underscores underneath the words. And also, if you would like to email me for some exclusive content from this book, my email is reina@reina-rose.com. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. God bless and keep you, and nourish your soul.